Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. So welcome back to ISKCON of Silicon Valley. Thanks for joining in for this hearing and chanting session. All of you who drove, risked life and limb to go through the traffic, and everyone else who's joining us online from various places around the world, thanks for tuning in. In the Bhagavad Gita, 1864, Krishna mentions, after his dialogue with Arjuna, because you are my very dear friend, I am speaking to you my supreme instruction, the most confidential knowledge of all. Hear this from me, for it is for your benefit. Ishto si me dridhamiti tato vakshyami te hitam. Hitam means benefit. And of course, everyone's looking how to get some benefit in life. We look for the various ways that we can fortify our wealth and whatever kind of reputation and other types of good fortune that we might have in the world. But here, Krishna's speaking to Arjuna, and by the power of the disciplic succession, we're privy to the conversation. And here at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives indication that the greatest benediction comes from hearing the conversation, just reading it. So we're very fortunate to come to the Bhagavad Gita. And for those who know the purpose of life, as it is mentioned in the Vedas, Shrinvantu Vishve Amritasya Putra. This is a verse that says that actually you are all sons of nectar. You're born of nectar. Your purpose in life is to drink nectar. You are meant to be immortal. So it says, awaken. And don't deprive yourself of drinking nectar and go after some miserable situation of life and drink poison. Isn't that an encouraging statement from the Vedas? So the real nectar comes from the sound vibration that emanates from the lotus mouth of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Himself. And amazingly, it's an open secret, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Raja Vidya Raja Guhyam. It's the supreme secret, but it's open to everybody. And if one takes advantage of this, then one really does drink nectar and also improves oneself in noticeable ways. It's not that when we read Bhagavad Gita that we don't notice for ourselves that we're becoming spiritually satisfied and also intelligent. In the second canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada writes in one of your favorite verses, Satyadev Prabhu, Anamapakai, the verse about using the logic and intelligence to understand how you're not your body. In his purport, he writes that the Bhagavad Gita is the Vedic intelligence. So if you want an external hard drive to get a little more intelligence in your life, you've got it here. That's what this is, an external hard drive with Vedic intelligence in it. And all you have to do to transfer it is the good old-fashioned way of listening to it, chanting the verses, discussing them, and so forth. And you can download that intelligence right into your brain and into your heart, and your life will change in noticeable ways. So if we look at the third chapter, 10th verse of the Bhagavad Gita, we start to get an idea of how the universe works. In this section of the Gita, and this chapter is called Karma Yoga, Krishna talks about the chakra, or the wheel of life, and how it works. So in this verse, Sahajagna Prajashishtva Pravacha Prajapati Anena Prashavishyadvam Eshavo Strishtakamaduk. He's saying that along with sacrifice, Sahajagna, keep going up, along with Yagya, Praja, the generations, Shrishva, at the creation, the Shrishva, when the creation takes place, the Lord gives us opportunity to thrive in the material world. There's a system through which one can thrive and get everything that one needs. So he says, in the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and demigods, along with sacrifices for Vishnu. Down. And blessed them by saying, be thou happy by this yajna, because its performance will bestow upon you everything desirable for living happily and achieving liberation. So, along with the human beings that we see here, there are also devas, or empowered beings who are in charge of various physical elements of the universe and how they function. And so there's a symbiotic relationship between the living entities like humans, especially humans, and the devas, or the demigods. And that is when the human beings perform the proper kind of sacrifice for the demigods, for the devas, then the devas, being pleased, that will supply everything necessary for living comfortably in this world. And there's a way in which when you get your electricity bill and you pay it, then your electricity stays on, doesn't it? For the most part. And if you don't pay it, then miraculously, to some people, it goes off. I've seen that happen before, when people forget to pay the bill or think that it's okay not to pay it, and then the electricity doesn't come. You may not realize that there's a person behind the electrical switch, and there's a decision-making process of whether to send it or not. And in the universe, there's a similar system that everything that we have, meaning the goods and services that we're receiving, are coming from personalities who are in charge of the various functions of the universe. So I'll read the purport. The material creation by the Lord of creatures, Vishnu, is a chance offered to the conditioned souls to come back home, back to Godhead. All living entities within the material creation are conditioned by material nature because of their forgetfulness of their relationship to Vishnu or Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The Vedic principles are to help us understand this eternal relation, as it is stated in the Bhagavad Gita, Vaisesika Dasa Vedya. The Lord says that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand Him. In the Vedic hymns it is said, Patim Vishvasyat Meshvaram. Therefore, the Lord of the living entities is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vishnu. In the Srimad Bhagavatam also, 2.420, Srila Shukadeva Goswami describes the Lord as Pati in so many ways. Shriyapatir Yagdapati Prajapatir Dhyampatir Lokapatir Dharapati Patir Gatish Chandraka Vrishni Sattvatam Prasidatam Me Bhagavan Satam Pati. The Prajapati is Lord Vishnu, and He is the Lord of all living creatures, all worlds and all beauties, and the protector of everyone. The Lord created this material world to enable the conditioned souls to learn how to perform yajnas, sacrifices for the satisfaction of Vishnu, so that while in the material world, they can live very comfortably without anxiety, and after finishing the present material body, they can enter into the kingdom of God. That is the whole program for the conditioned soul. By performance of yajna, the conditioned souls gradually become Krishna conscious and become godly in all respects. In the age of Kali, the Sankirtan Yajna, the chanting of the names of God, is recommended by the Vedic scriptures, and this transcendental system was introduced by Lord Chaitanya for the deliverance of all men in this age. Sankirtan Yajna and Krishna consciousness go well together. Lord Krishna, in his devotional form as Lord Chaitanya, is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam 11.532 as follows, with special reference to the Sankirtan Yajna. Krishna Varnum Tvasha Krishnam Sango Pangascha Parshadam Yagnaya Sankirtana Prayera Yajantihi Sumedasaha. In the age of Kali, people who are endowed with sufficient intelligence will worship the Lord, who is accompanied by his associates by performance of Sankirtan Yajna. Other yajnas prescribed in the Vedic literatures are not so easy to perform in this age of Kali. But the Sankirtan Yajna is easy and sublime for all purposes, as recommended in Bhagavad Gita also 9:14. So, Prabhupada also indicates here what kind of yajna we can perform in the Kali Yuga. The costly kinds of sacrifices that were performed in previous ages by doing a sacrifice of grains and ghee into fire and so forth are not practical in this age. Priests to chant the mantras correctly are not readily available also. But in the age of Kali Yuga, by performing the Sankirtan Yajna, one will also achieve the results of performing sacrifices, as is mentioned in this chapter. So there's a relationship with the demigods, as Krishna goes on to say in a few verses hence from this one. Anand bhavanti bhutani, that all living entities subsist on food grains. You can move ahead a few verses. Anand bhavati bhutani. So, where do grains come from? They come from the earth. And you just move ahead. You'll run into it. Sorry, I should have just told you which number it is, but I don't have it in my head. Anad, from grains. Bhavanti, bhutani, the material bodies of the living entities. So interestingly, if we analyze our material bodies, Krishna's giving this example here that our bodies come from grains in a couple of ways. One way is that the sun infuses its energy into plants that have a special little factory in each leaf. Through photosynthesis, there's stored energy, and then a fruit is produced. So we're actually eating sun energy coming from the mercy of the sun himself. And then, of course, grains don't grow without water. And Indra is known to be a god of rain who performs the function of making sure that the grains get water and so forth. Now, of course, in modern times, people have thought that this is a little bit primitive idea, and that actually through development of our modern systems of technology, that what do we need such archaic or perhaps mythological ideas for about a god or a goddess performing the functions of a particular phenomena in nature? And Prabhupada's answer to that was really simple. He said, good luck eating nuts and bolts. Because although you can create a factory which takes natural resources from the ground, and you can create all kinds of material facilities, like as he represented those by saying nuts and bolts, or we could say, good luck eating your iPhone when you're hungry. It won't suffice. It won't replace grains. And with all technological advancement, we can't produce even one grain. It's a miracle of nature that's put forth by the special yajna that's done, and then the grain grows from the rain, and that becomes our body. Actually, I think I am my body, so I look in the mirror and say, I'm such and such, and this is me, but actually what's the body made out of? It's made out of material elements, and those come into being through a transfer from the earth, through the grains, and into the bodily organs. Actually, we eat, we digest, and it gets distributed in miraculous ways as well, so that the body develops. And another way in which we come from grains is the grains create semen, which then is the catalyst for the next life, where the jiva takes birth. Karmana devanitrena jantur deho papataye Striya pravishta udaram pumso reta kanashraya. Pumso reta kanashraya means that the particle of consciousness, the living entity or the jiva, is there within the semen, and it goes into the womb of a woman, and then it gets implanted there within the womb, and then it grows into another human child. And that semen comes from grains. And there is a secular pattern in nature through which the jivas end up in grains also, even as they're descending from heavenly planets. All this sounds sort of wondrous to the person who's educated in a modern way, like, you're kidding me, right? But actually, this is the system in the universe. And if you look into the phenomena of material nature, it's not something that you can reproduce in a laboratory. And it's also miraculous in the way that it works. I mean, how is it that a plant drinks up sun energy and then converts it into something that we can eat and so forth? If you can extrapolate from that, you can understand also there's an intelligence behind the creation, and intelligence means a person. In any kind of working system we see here in Silicon Valley or elsewhere, we find that there's a chain of command and there's intelligent design. And even if we don't see from the outside who that is, we can understand from the symptoms that the chain of command is there. So this is what Krishna is telling us here in this chapter, at least in this section, that there's this wheel of life through which we perform sacrifice, and then there's abundance within nature because of the sacrifice. And now someone will say, well, we'll just forget about sacrifice. But then there are consequences to that. Just as I mentioned before, if I don't pay my bills, then my electricity will get shut off. And one of the ways that human society suffers without sacrifice is that there's a restriction in nature. For instance, there are droughts through which things just don't grow. And then there are floods where you get too much rain. And then there are ways in which there's great unrest even within the human society, because people's life airs and mental processes become deranged by not being in harmony with the laws of nature. All this happens quite naturally when one neglects the performance of yajna. And part of that Krishna describes as thievery. You take all these things and you think they're just for free. Like if I pull up at your house with a truck and I just take a crowbar and open your front door and start loading up my truck and driving away, you'll think that I'm quite odd, to say the least. Right? And similarly, coming into the world and just taking things without offering them back to at least to the demigods in return, is a sign of ingratitude and being disconnected from the cycle of sacrifice in this world. So this is very much necessary for human society to be peaceful, for the laws of nature to work in a way that is that provides an abundant supply of whatever human beings need. And this is how Krishna describes it here. So, so this is Krishna recommending in this third chapter that you should do your duty to perform such sacrifices. And by doing that, he said, there's a way in which you start to develop a kind of understanding of how the world works, and also you come into a sense of a detachment from material desires. All this happens by doing your duty properly and performing the yajnas. He tells Arjuna in this chapter that even if you're already detached and you understand how the world works, you should still perform yajna to set an example for other people so that they'll see how to do it. He mentions King Janak, who is already a self-realized person, but he said King Janak as an example, did sacrifices to show the ordinary people this process of karma yoga, of performing activities in obeyance of the scriptural laws, how to perform sacrifice so that they would be expressing gratitude and giving back. And by that, one would come to a greater sense of knowledge about who one is and what my position in the world is. And he also says to those who are already enlightened that don't tell people who aren't already aware of the fact that they're not their bodies and so forth, that they should just quit doing sacrifice. Because he says, because they're not enlightened, they need to perform sacrifice so they can gradually come to that level. So he said you shouldn't dissuade people from doing their sacrificial work to please the Lord, and they shouldn't stop that prematurely. Otherwise, their progress will be hindered. So this is some very commonsensical words from Krishna, and one who has a little connection with nature itself, starts to see how the cycles of nature and our relationship with nature is, how dependent we are and so forth. There is a way in which in a more modern society we can become detached from that and unaware of the fact that we're dependent on the earth. I may be more aware of the fact that I'm dependent on the truckers' union. I can't remember when it was, but when I was young, there was a strike going on, I think in California, from the lettuce pickers and others. And there was a lack of greens coming into the Safeway or wherever we shopped, I forget. And I was quite shocked by that, because I thought, well, of course it just shows up here in the store. How could it not show up? And my mother explained to me, well, it actually grows in a field. And then people put it on trucks and they bring it here, and if the trucking people don't bring it, then we're not going to get any. And I thought that was outrageous. And people all over the world who don't live near a place where the food is actually growing, or grains are grown and that they get processed, and then you offer them and eat them, might become detached from this idea that we're actually dependent on nature. And there is a way in which, when you're closer to nature, you get a sense of the awesomeness of the process, and you see that there's something going on here that's very intelligent. The ways in which certain kinds of things break down and they become fertilizer for the rest of them, and plants naturally give off seeds that grow into other plants and so forth. You can start to develop a sense of the all-pervading intelligence within the universe. And this is closer to actual advanced human life, where one's aware of this and then performs sacrifice to please the Supreme, or to please the Supreme's representatives, the demigods, out of a sense of gratitude. So here are a couple more verses that Krishna, to follow up on this particular point. Continuing on from 9:10, in 9:11, Krishna says, the demigods, being pleased by sacrifices, will also please you, and thus by cooperation between men and demigods, prosperity will reign for all. In charge of the various necessities of life, this is 3:12, by the way. In charge of the various necessities of life, the demigods, being satisfied by the performance of yajna, will supply all necessities to you. But he who enjoys such gifts without offering them to the demigods in return is certainly a thief. The devotees of the Lord are released from all kinds of sins because they eat food which is offered first for sacrifice. Others who prepare food for personal sense enjoyment verily eat only sins. All living bodies subsist on food grains, this is 14, which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, sacrifice, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. Regulated activities, now this is a very important verse, not that the other ones weren't, but this brings a very important verse about yajna. Regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So in this section, we get the sense of how important it is to perform yajna, or sacrifice, because that's another name for Krishna, yajna. And he's eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So to be connected with him and with the purpose of the world, then you have to perform yajna. So that's helpful to know, isn't it? And it gives a clear idea of the purpose of the world. Now, if you stop anybody on the street in San Francisco, particularly downtown, where everyone's in a big rushing hurry, and you ask them what's the purpose of the universe, what do you think they'll say? They'll say, "Get out of here." Are you crazy? I don't have time to talk about such nonsense. Because there's a short-sightedness that takes place when one doesn't have a bigger vision of the purpose of the world and so forth. And that really takes place when one performs yajna. You start thinking about how we're dependent and how there's a goal to life and so forth. One performs this kind of karma, or doing one's duty according to the Vedas by performing certain sacrifices. Of course, now this is mentioned that one can perform sacrifices for the demigods and for the devas, and later on, Krishna describes how people who become obsessed with worshiping devas and satisfying them are hritajnana, they've lost their intelligence. So there's a way in which one should be aware of the fact that these devas are simply limbs of the body of the universal form. This is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam and elsewhere. Mukabahu ruparebhya purushasya shamaisaha jagnire chatparo. Gunar vipradayo pratak. Please look it up. Green Book. 11th canto, yes. So, mukabahu ruparebhya, this means it's talking about the various aspects of the body of the universal form. And the ways in which one should realize also that the demigods are simply various limbs of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and the various varnas and ashrams were manifested from the universal body of the Lord. Becoming aware of that and their interconnectedness, the interconnectedness of the devas and of our duties in life in the various varnas and ashrams, and how they're connected to the universal form of the Lord, is vital for a healthy life, human life, to be aware of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Because Mukabahuru Parebhya is the next verse after that says, and these are both quoted by Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to Sanatana Goswami. What is it? 11.5.2? Yeah, let's look at 11.5.2. In which Mukabahuru Parebhya Purushasya Shramaisaha Chatvaro Jagnire Varna Gunar Vipradaya Pratak. And the translation, please. Sri Chamasa said, each of the four social orders headed by the Brahmanas was born through different combinations of the modes of nature from the face, arms, thighs, and feet of the Supreme Lord in his universal form. Thus the four spiritual orders were also generated. And the next verse is? What is it? Ya esham purusham shakshad atma prabhavam ishvaram nabhajantya vijananti stanad prashta padantyata. And then this makes an important point that if any members of the four varnas and four ashrams fail to worship or intentionally disrespect the personality of Godhead, who is the source of their own creation, they will fall down from their position into a hellish state of life. So humans, when they become detached from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, become ruined. Their culture gets ruined, their health gets ruined, their consciousness gets ruined. And so it's very vital for this concept of connectedness to the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be prevalent in society. It's one of the reasons Prabhupada advocated so much for having farm communities, so that we could demonstrate the principle and experience it for ourselves, being closer to the earth, for one thing, to Mother Earth. So then, back to the Bhagavad Gita, and I'm almost done making this particular point. Krishna says, all living bodies subsist on food grains which are produced from rains. Rains are produced by performance of yajna, and yajna is born of prescribed duties. 15 says, regulated activities are prescribed in the Vedas, and the Vedas are directly manifested from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, the all-pervading transcendence is eternally situated in acts of sacrifice. So, then, of course, we heard earlier that Prabhupada said that the sacrifices of previous ages are also assumed by the Sankirtan Yajna in this particular age. And if one performs the Sankirtan Yajna properly, then one is connected perfectly in the process of Yajna, or sacrifice. And so before I go in, this is one section, I'm going to go talk about another point, but I just wanted to establish this particular chakra of life that Krishna describes here in the 3rd chapter, and how we sustain ourselves as human beings through yajna, not just by hard work, but by actually performing proper sacrifice in gratitude to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And I'll just take a couple of reflections before I go to the next section. Yes.
So, yeah, I just wanted to reflect on the point that Yajna means Vishnu, and Prabhupada says that in one of the purports, as you said, that as this verse says, that all pervading transcendence is situated in acts of sacrifice. So by performing sacrifice, we can experience the connection with transcendence or Krishna.
Yeah, that's something that's palpable. And those sacrifices we perform, for instance, when we do the Sankirtan Yajna, just as Lord Chaitanya did it. For instance, this Friday night we'll be meeting in Palo Alto, and we'll set up a Yajna Stali there where we can chant Hare Krishna, hopefully with those illuminated pillars. And we'll chant Hare Krishna, just as Lord Chaitanya taught how to perform such a yajna as the congregational public chanting of the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. This is a form of sacrifice. Now, I challenge you to go there and be part of the yajna and chant Hare Krishna, and then notice how you feel afterwards. It's a sense of feeling profound peace of mind and invigoration, and sort of a natural balance in life that happens quite naturally when one performs that Sankirtan Yajna. And one gets insight, feels the influx of knowledge or the illumination of knowledge that I'm not my body and so forth, quite naturally just from performing that sacrifice. Or if you do it individually by chanting Hare Krishna, by repeating the sacred names of God individually by doing japa, that you'll notice that you become stimulated spiritually, naturally. For instance, if you take time in the morning before you jump into other kinds of work that require making decisions and value judgments and so forth, if you take the time to do the yajna, the sacrifice, which Krishna mentions in the Gita, of all the sacrifices I am japa. So if you do that first, you'll notice, it'll be very noticeable that the insight, the wherewithal to control the senses, you become infused with these abilities simply by performing that sacrifice. Now, if you neglect it and you try to work on your own, then gradually you'll find yourself stuck in the mud somewhere, and it's really hard to get out. Some people are going, yeah, thank you. Yeah, sure. That's definitely hard to get out. So yajna is very, very important. And because Krishna's there within the yajna, even Brahma, when he first comes out of the lotus flower in the beginning of creation, intuits through hearing the syllables tapa from the Supreme Personality of God, and remembers, oh yeah, I have to perform yajna. So then he performs sacrifice. And of course, in the very beginning creation, this is what the Purusha Sukta is all about. There was this instruction to perform sacrifice in the great sages. The universe is just being created. Where are they going to get grains and ghee and a fire and so forth? So then they're actually subtly taking the various limbs and parts of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who's named Yajna, and offering them back to Yajna to perform sacrifice. So it's not as if you have to have even full facility anywhere and a particular kind of material facility in order to perform the yajna. There's ways that you can perform it quite naturally. And of course, in this age of Kali Yuga, just by chanting Hare Krishna, you just need a tongue and the wherewithal to chant. Yes, before.
So recently we were, because it's spring, we were planting some fruits and vegetables in the front yard, and I never thought I would learn much of it. But when I first started seeing, the seeds of okra and basil, they were so small, and I thought, what can come out of this? What intelligence would this have? And as I'm seeing those little sprouts that are coming now, I was amazed that such small elements have so much, as you were saying, divine intelligence, that given the right environment and the cooperation of the elements and a little bit of, honestly, like magic, these little seeds are coming out. So I was reflecting how even in life, like the molecular activities we do might seem like totally insignificant, but there's some intelligence that like adds up, builds together, and becomes this colossal like change later on.
Yes.
Yeah.
And of course, as we all know, Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu used the metaphor of gardening. He said, I'm a gardener. And that was his prime metaphor for describing spiritual life, is gardening. Planting seeds is the seed of bhakti, and watering the seed is hearing and chanting, performing that sacrifice of hearing and chanting. And then the creeper grows. And then as a gardener is very careful to protect the plants when they come up, one has to avoid certain kinds of offenses. Some of them are compared to letting an elephant into your garden and so forth. So he used all that to explain spiritual life. It's very enlivening, especially when you go in garden, and you see how this actually works. You had a point.
It just dawned on me what you said in the beginning of the class, that what is said in the Vedas, that like we are all born of nectar, and why go after something that's poisonous?
So encouraging. It's reminding us, the Vedas are calling out to us and saying, you're born of nectar, you're meant to drink nectar, go after the nectar, don't drink poison, awaken. So these points are all very optimistic, and it just means we have to heed the instructions of Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita and learn how to take the nectar. And here we're getting very specific directions about where nectar comes from. It comes from the Supreme Personality of Godhead and performing yajna. If we perform sacrifice, then we'll actually be nourished, and we can actually drink nectar. This is something that Rishabhadev says, Nayam deho deha bhajam nirloke, kashtam kamam arhate vidbhujamnye, tapo divyam putraka yena sattvam shudyad yasmad brahma saukyam tvanantam. So he says, don't act like an animal. Animals just grab stuff and eat it, and they don't show any gratitude. He said, tapo divyam, rather as a human being, use your higher intelligence to perform tapasya. What kind of tapasya? Divyam, divine, for God. Do it for Krishna. Tapo divyam putraka, then you'll get purified. Putraka yena sattvam shudyad yasmad brahma saukyam tvanantam. Then you'll be able to really enjoy eternal happiness that never ends. Yes, 1, 2.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. I was thinking about the Bhagavatam verse that you were mentioning, that when someone doesn't pray to the Supreme, they'll actually fall down to the hellish planet. So, when I look at that just from the outside, it looks like, why is that the reason? But then I was thinking about an analogy, please correct me if I'm wrong, like the little fingers that they work for the whole body. But when the little fingers decide that I just want to do myself everything and I'm not worried about the body, of course the little fingers will perish at some point. So to say the fact as a fact sounds very vivid and bad as such. But then in true fact, it's that the little fingers have to work with the body for it to attain its the real purpose. So
yes, that's an example Prabhupada used to give, that the finger works as a cooperator with the rest of the body. And as soon as it stops cooperating, then it's considered diseased. If you call your finger and it doesn't come one day, you go like, hey, what's wrong with you? You go to the doctor and say, there's something wrong with my finger. So living entities are parts and parcels of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they cooperate with Him. And as soon as they stop cooperating, then they're considered to be in diseased condition of life. They're turned around the wrong direction. Prabhu, you had a point. 1, 2.
Hare Krishna Maharaj. Actually, my question was regarding the medium through which the souls come in. I thought I read somewhere or I heard somewhere that the souls enter grass also, and you mentioned they eventually end up in grains. I was wondering if do they also end up in vegetables? I mean, through vanaspati essentially, and then there are different kind of vanaspati like vegetation, some in tamogun, rajogun, satugun. So I was wondering, are those the sanskars of the souls that cause them to take birth or appear in those vegetations?
That's very technical, and I'd have to do a little more research from those who like to delve into those details, and I can do that and find out for you. The Prabhupada gives more general, commentaries about that, about the grains and stuff. I heard a talk by Bhakti True Maharaj in New Vrindavan a couple of years ago, where he was talking about the actual descent of the soul from the heavenly planets after it uses up all its punya, and it's pretty graphic. Is anybody else there? Anyway, it was. Anyway, I'm not even going to repeat it right now because, first of all, it was pretty heavy. But your question was, do they end up in grains? Do you have some shastra on that, about the particular ways in which?
No, I don't. But I just want to make another point here that, I always liked 314. But it blows me that I've actually ignored 315 because it's actually the continuation of 314. And then Lord Krishna actually brings together the beginning and the end, right? That everything, the Brahma is actually connected to Yajna.
Yeah.
So thank you for...
Yeah, it's a circle, right?
Yeah, it's a circle.
Circle of sacrifice.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Rajeshwari Leela, and then... Okay.
Today's class was actually reminding me what we are reading currently in the Bhagavatam, the 5th canto, instructions by Jada Bharat to King Rahugana. And the final instructions of the material world is a forest of enjoyment. And that's almost like, Prabhupada's purports are like a surgical operation on my heart, because it's so eye-opening, the situation of a soul that's lost in the material world. Just like a person walks into a forest and anywhere the wild animals can just pop up. And then he talks about a hole which you can't see. So I was just thinking that how, Prabhupada is just every purport and every...
You talk about the material world's you enter into the hole. Yeah, so that he said that there's a hole, right? He gave that analogy, or that it's like a hole you enter into and then you don't come back, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, Prabhu.
Krishna Maharaj, I think you made a point that when there is intelligence, there exists a person. It was very striking, because I think normally we see there in some human-made devices or things, there is intelligence and we recognize that there exists a person. But when it goes to nature, people commonly believe that it's by chance.
Yeah, I had a vivid experience of this myself, and that was at Govardhan, where I've stayed for the last 19 years during Kartik. For 30 days of Kartik, I always stay at the same ashram. And we get so wrapped up in what we're doing, go to Mangalarti, chant your rounds, then do puja, and then, if we're going to Govardhan Parikram, and then we come back, we do our reading, and there's breakfast and lunch, and so there's dinner too, but I didn't show up for that. In any case, we sit in the prasadam hall. It's a very joyous time. We all sit together in this long hallway, and we sing the prayers together. Nobody starts eating till everyone's got full prasadam, and then we take prasadam, honor prasadam together. And so this amazing prasadam comes out. The brahmacharis in the ashram usually serve it out. It's one of the most joyous experiences of my life, sitting there. And one day it occurred to me, I have no idea where the kitchen is. It just struck me. And then I went out and I said, where's the kitchen and who's cooking all this? So that Keshav Bharati Maharaj introduced me to the cook and showed me where the kitchen was, and I went in there and said, thank you very much. And I saw he was in there, his wife was helping, and there was this big production going on, and it was a lot of work, because he's cooking for sometimes 100, 200 people a day. And so then I started thinking that just as I didn't know where the kitchen was, I didn't know where the cook was, I just took it for granted. I appreciated it, but I really didn't go very far to find out where the person was. That it's really easy to just look out at nature and think, oh, there's light, there's air, there's water, and it's really nice. But where's it all coming from? There is a place, there's a location, there's an origin of everything that we can give gratitude to, and that's the sacrifice, giving back. There's one more. Yes. Two more. 1, 2.
Prabhu, continuing with what Prabhu was asking, I was wondering that I had read this pastime where the mountains used to be flying, and then they would just drop off places where Indra cut off the wings.
Yeah.
So I was thinking, does that mean every mountain that we see around is a living entity?
Well, they could be dead. And Prabhupada says that. He says there's some of them have left, it's the stack of bones, and yes, but that's there in the Puranas about living entities as mountains having wings cut off and then being there. And generally they're described as living entities also because, there's a soul behind everything that's productive we find in the material world, and mountains are productive. They can produce offspring and so forth, or not offspring, but all kinds of byproducts and so forth. So that conception is there, yes.
Yeah. About the stones, some of the stones are living, some are not living, is that right?
Yes. How far down this road are we going to go now? Okay.
Just on that, you began with that, we are born of nectar and we are
Yeah.
not. So I was just.
That really
wondering,
caught everyone's imagination.
Yeah, you always, I think you and even from Prabhupada, I've heard that another verse, Tamaso ma jyotirgamaya. So it just reminded me of that, asato ma sadgamaya. So I just kind of.
Asato ma sadgamaya. It's a very sutra-esque point that give up the temporary and run towards the eternal. Just turn your head and go for what's eternal. It's just an encouragement that's given there in the Vedas. So this whole material creation has a purpose. This is the reason that I brought this up, and I wanted to cite this section. It's organized. It's very organized. There's a purpose behind it. And now the whole material creation starts off as something called Prakriti, which is a time at which, when the creation, of course, which is cyclical, the elements of the universe are eternal, except for they're manifested and then unmanifested. But they've always been here. There's never a time when the material world wasn't there, or I should say, didn't exist. But sometimes it's an unmanifested state, and sometimes it's in a manifested state. But all the elements are eternal. They're all emanations from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Krishna describes, obviously, Bhumir Apo Anulo Vayu Kamano Bhurir Evacha Ahankara Ityam Me Binna Prakritir Ashtada. He gives a catalog of his separated material energies, both gross and subtle. So all those are there in Prakriti, but Prakriti is a state in which the material nature is not organized in any way. It's nondescript. However, when the Supreme Personality of Godhead in the form of Mahavishnu glances at material nature, Mayaya Ramamanasya Naviyogas Tayasaha Atmana Ramaya Reme Tyakvakalam Shashikshaya, then the creation starts from his glance. His glance is personified as Shambhu. And the Prakriti is the mother, the womb in which the living entities take birth. As Krishna says elsewhere in the Bhagavad Gita, that this material nature is the womb and the living entities take birth here. So that starts with the glance of Mahavishnu. The living entities, the jivas, and also time and karma agitate the Prakriti, and the Prakriti then becomes what's called Mahat. And Mahat is very much in the mode of goodness, and from the Mahat are manifested, that begins to form the divisions of the three gunas, the three modes of material nature. Then from the three modes of material nature become manifested the various categories of the material world. But first of all, let me just mention the sequence at which this happens is described in the Vedas as during the manifest time of the material world, when it comes out of the body of Mahavishnu to the time it goes back into the body of Mahavishnu is 311 trillion years. And I looked for that on my Apple Watch to see if I could set this timer. It has a customized thing, but it wouldn't go up to 311 trillion. Because I thought maybe I could count down. And we're about halfway through now, so divide 311 trillion, put it in half. How many years do we have left? Okay, whatever it is, it doesn't go on my watch. But you can count it down. The 311 trillion years, as mentioned in the Brahma Samhita, very interesting imagery here. Yashaika nishvasitakala matavalam ya jivanti loma vilaja jaganandata. Vishnur mahansa hi ahyasya kala vishesho govindamadi purusham tamaham bhajami. When Mahavishnu exhales, then all of the energies, the material energies come out, the living entities and so forth are manifest. And when he inhales, it's all drawn back within his body. So what happens to the living entities when they go back into the body of the Mahavishnu? And that is that they go into a state called susupti. There's 3 states of consciousness which are mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam that living entities experience in their material life. And one of them is sleep with dreams. Anyone? Then there's sleep without dreams. And then there's the suspended animation where there's nothing really to be conscious of because they're within the body. They're conscious living entities, but there's nothing to be conscious of. They're there within the body of Mahavishnu in a kind of suspended animation. And after being within the body of Mahavishnu, then they come back out again into the material creation. And all the elements start to be manifested and reorganized through the 3 modes of material nature. And then there's a way in which the living entity takes up where he left off in the last creation, in the last manifestation. It's kind of like, like a CD player. You're playing a song and you just turn it off, and then have you ever had this thing? Like, I have this little red box that Bali Mardhan Prabhu gave me with all of Prabhupada's lectures on it, and it's kind of nice. Wherever you turn it off, like in mid-sentence, when you flip it back on again, that's where Prabhupada starts off again, mid-sentence where he left off. So I had this experience, I had used my box, and a few weeks later, I turned it back on again. And there it was, right where I left off, halfway through the sentence, and I was like, oh yeah, right, I was listening to that. So in a similar way, when the soul comes back out into the material creation, it's all of a sudden, after that 311 trillion year switch off, then back comes the awareness of the samskars from previous impressions, purva samskar. So this is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam, 1st canto, 2nd chapter, 2nd to the last verse. Asau gunamayer bhaver bhuta sukshmendriyatmavi swanirmiteshu nirvishto punkte bhuteshu tadgunan. That would be 1, 2, 33. And in this verse, Sutta Goswami says, translation, the supersoul enters into the bodies of the created beings who are influenced by the modes of material nature and causes them to enjoy the effect of these modes by the subtle mind. And Prabhupada goes on to explain that when the living entities are reintroduced into the Mahat, then they're reminded, Krishna reminds them of, here's what you wanted to do before. And the Bhagavatam explains that the real purpose, Krishna's real purpose in remanifesting the material world is to give every living entity an opportunity to wake up, to drink nectar, to remember you're born of nectar. You don't belong to the material world at all. However, Krishna says in the 3rd chapter, in the section that we're talking about, after he describes yajna, he describes those persons who are very much attached to their bodies and minds. They're influenced by the false ego, and therefore he says, prakrite kriyamanani gunai karmani sarvasha ahankara vimudhatma kartaham iti manyate. So this means that a person becomes fooled into thinking that I'm the body and I'm the doer. Ahankara means ahang, kara. Kara means to do, and ahang means me. I'm doing it. A person who becomes enlightened becomes a witness, a sakshi, and sees that actually, although I'm within a body and I'm within a universe, it's all moving around me. I'm observing it. I'm the witness of it, but I'm not actually doing it. That's something that Krishna very clearly articulates in the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita when he says, Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyet tatvavit pashyan shinvan sprisan jigran ashnan gachan swapan shwasan pralapan vishrinan grinnan unmishan nimishan napi indriyan indriyarteshu vartanta ididarayan. So this is a list of all the ways that the body's moving. Like right now, you're all moving your eyes, blinking, right? Nimisha, you're blinking. He mentions that, blinking the eyes, and you've got your hands ready to grab stuff. You were grabbing the microphone, the phone a minute ago. That was like going on almost automatically, right? And I'm speaking, moving the microphone around, but all these, Krishna says, naiva kinshit. There's nothing you're doing, actually. It's being moved by material nature. If you're in divine consciousness, you're observing how it's being moved. And an example that's given in elsewhere is that a child goes into a gymnasium and sees a big weight and thinks, oh, I'd like to lift that too. And then goes, and it obviously can't lift it, but then the parent stands behind and picks it up. And then the child thinks, oh, I'm lifting it. Look how strong I am. Have you ever seen that, something like that? So the living entity foolishly thinks like I'm doing everything and I'm controlling the world even. But actually it's all going on by a superior arrangement. So this is the purpose of the material creation, for the living entity to come out of this ignorance, come out of this sense of ahankar. So then there's a description of the ways in which the living entity gets ensconced. Look up the word. Ensconced in the material nature. So the soul is called the Atma, and is a chitkana, or a particle of a pure consciousness. But when it comes in contact with the material nature, it develops a sense of false ego, ahankar, which is actually a material element. It's a subtle material element that connects me to this idea that I'm the doer in the material world. And so there's a kind of a map that Kapila gives in the third canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, where he describes the ways in which the Mahat is divided by the three modes of material nature when they become agitated by the living entities who come into into nature with their particular desires. And this is something Krishna mentions in the Bhagavad Gita. Aparayamitastvanyam prakritim vidime param jiva bhuta mahabaho yayedam daryate jagat. The living entities are a superior category of energy because they're wholly spiritual, and they get mixed up with the material energy, and they're animating it because of their desires, and the material nature is facilitating their particular desires. So within the three modes of material nature, from this sense that I'm the controller, or that I want to control this material nature, the living entity develops this ahankar, and the ahankar divides the material nature into, through the agency of the three modes of material nature, from sattva gun is manifested manas, or the mind. And from rajagun is developed the buddhi, or the intelligence. And then from the tamagun, the gross material elements are manifest. Sound, touch, form, taste, and smell, which are called the tanmatra, or the subtle forms of the gross elements. And from the rajasic ahankar comes the senses, the 10 senses, the karmendriyas and the gyanendriyas. There's 5 senses which are there for working, like the hands, the legs, and the genitals, the anus. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's one more. A working sense. What is it? Speaking. Thank you, sir. And then we have the knowledge-gathering senses, which are easier to locate. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So 5. So you got these 10 indriyas. The idea is that you can map it all out, and you can see actually what the soul's stepping into, and the facility that's been given by the material nature for the soul to interact with the objects of the senses in the material world. So now, when one begins to take up the practice of karma yoga, one starts to develop knowledge. And that knowledge means to understand that I'm not this body, actually. I'm operating within a machine. And Krishna describes this in the Bhagavad Gita, where he says, Kshetra jnam chapi mam vidhi sarva kshetrishu bharatara kshetra kshetra jnayo jnanam yatach jnanam matam mama. Real knowledge means to be able to see the difference between the field, which is the body, and the knower of the field. And then one comes to this gyan, or this sense of knowledge from performing this karma yoga. And from jnana yoga, cultivating knowledge, then one gradually develops the system of dhyan, or meditating on the supersoul. And as is described in the Bhagavad Gita and also in the Yoga Sutras, the purpose of this dhyan, or the shortcut, is Ishvara Pranidhan. When one starts to appreciate the presence of the supersoul within the heart, sees, oh, God's in my heart, and He's very beautiful, and He's actually providing me with everything. He's my friend sitting there. Then one starts to come to the point of bhakti. However, so there's this, as Prabhupada describes in the Bhagavad Gita, a yoga ladder through which one gradually comes to this point of knowledge, I'm not my body, and then meditation on the supersoul, and then a sense of devotion. And of course, there's a way in which if you take directly to bhakti, then you bypass the other processes, because bhakti directly addresses the original problem that I have coming into the material world, and that is forgetting God. And if I just remember Him and follow His instruction, which is what Krishna says in the 3rd chapter, in the 31st verse, Ye me matamidam nityam anutishtanti manava, that if you just now follow me through Buddha yoga or devotional service, follow my instruction, then I'll perfectly inform you from within. And you'll start to develop this sense of connectedness with me, and a sense of bhakti, a relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And in this way, one can perfect one's life. So the chanting of Hare Krishna is mentioned in the Srimad Bhagavatam be the perfection of the process of bhakti yoga, and that if one is chanting Hare Krishna, then it's understood that one's already performed all the previous kinds of activities of sacrifice and so forth. As an example, Devahuti says, Aho bata shva pachato garyanya jiva grevartate namatubhyam te pusta paste juhavu sasna arya brahmanatra nama grananti yete. Oh, how wonderful it is if somebody even one time says Hare Krishna. You can understand they've already performed all the other inferior activities, just as much as, and it's not in the verse, but it's in the commentary, if one's a high court judge, we can understand that you went to law school. Otherwise, what are you doing there? Unless you were appointed by the President of the United States in the current period, in which case you could have been anything in your last life. I mean that in the most respectful way. Any other thoughts or reflections from this last part, Shraddha?
I have a question.
Yes.
So if we've been through all the other processes in our past lives, then why is it so hard to focus when chanting? If we've already been through dhyana yoga and been
well, because Kali Yuga is a very disturbing time, and we're right in the middle of it, and we don't even know how much in the middle of it we are. We just take it for granted that it's natural to fly through space at 600 miles an hour on an airplane with TVs going on every square inch of the place, and that it's normal that there's noise all the time coming from every single direction, and that we grew up in an atmosphere where we were basically looking at a screen. Have you ever seen a cat and you take a laser pointer and you go like this? The cat runs all over the place. Well, that's what, it's like you have to take a screen, and we're distracted. Manda samanda matayo manda bhagya hupadrata. It's a product of the age of Kali Yuga. It's actually a miracle that someone would have the wherewithal to overcome that, to come sit in a class like this, and not simply be carried away by all the other, habits and so forth. You could look at it the other way. I mean, how is it that you're able to control your mind so much and your senses even amidst all this that's going on. But the other answer is, that the chitta, which is the subtle psychological body that covers the soul, is made up of the subtle, as I said, psychological body. It's infused with what are called samskars, or previous impressions, and these are cumulative. I mean, even in this lifetime, I'm sure in some sort of hypnosis, I could recall to you hundreds, if not thousands, of jingles from advertisements. I mean, I can sing you a few right now. I'm not gonna, but they're in there. And that's just from one lifetime. What to speak of millions of lifetimes of hearing all kinds of stuff. There's so much noise that gets compacted into the chitta. I mean, it's so dense that it gets dark. And when the chitta is compressed, then you get this really dark space. So the process of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, as he described it, Cheto Darpana Marjanam, Bhavamaha Davagni Nirvapanam. So he says, do this sacrifice of the Sankirtan Yajna, and first thing is you start to clean out the chitta. He says it cleans the heart, which means that, our conscious psychological body is getting cleansed. And this is described, or the phenomena that we're talking about is described by Rupa Goswami in the Bhakti Samrita Sindhu, where he talks about the upadi. So upadi, he gives the example that a clear crystal, it's very beautiful, but anything you put next to it will influence the effulgence of that crystal. For instance, he says if you put a red rose right next to a clear crystal, the crystal's going to turn red. So my consciousness is originally clear, and it's Krishna conscious. But when I get influenced by all kinds of upadis, designations, things that are crowded into my chitta, these false designations, it appears as if this is what I am. And I misidentify myself as my body and my particular gender and my nation and all these kinds of things. So I become overwhelmed by that and misidentified. But I can become purified, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said, by hearing the transcendental sound vibration, Cheto Darpana Marjanam. It gets cleaned. You clean all that out. And then you can start to actually see what is your real self, what is your, the transitory nature of the body and the mind and what to speak of the life situation. One of the first stories I heard when I joined the Krishna conscious movement that came from Prabhupada was about the hairy sage, and he lived down by the Ganges, and his followers wanted to build him a little hut, and he said, "You don't need to build me any hut. I don't need any clothes because I'm not here for very long." And so, how long would he be there? For one lifetime of Brahma, for every hair he had on his body. And for him, it was like, I'm not here that long. Why do I need a hut? And so Prabhupada's point was that when one has this clear idea of one's spiritual identity, sees the whole material world as Prabodhananda Saraswati says, a will-o'-the-wisp. It's just passing by. It's transitory. But my nature is as an eternal soul. I have nothing to do with that. Yes.
I've always pondered on this point about how, Krishna reveals that we are all, coming from Mahavishnu. And when we have the material desires, when he's breathing in and then we stay there, and then he's breathing out. And then again, we are supported by the Virat Purusha. So again, it's an expansion. And yet, even in his own incarnation as Krishna, he's right in front of Duryodhan, and the souls like Duryodhan cannot recognize him as a Supreme Lord. So on one side, he's present, he's all pervading as Mahavishnu, and we are inside of the Virat Purusha. We might be even face to face. But why doesn't that fire just transform the iron-like heart into, I always think, like, why? I mean, we are so insignificant. How can we really do much in our own spiritual progress?
How was that last statement or question related to the first part?
I'm curious if there is any place in Shastra where Krishna talks about free will, because looks like Krishna doesn't want to interfere with the free will, and
He doesn't what?
he doesn't want to interfere with the free will of an insignificant jiva.
Yes.
And at the same time, he keeps reinforcing that we are within him and he's with us as Paramatma.
Yes.
And why doesn't he influence us and just remove that anarthas? And
What kind of influence would you like?
just to remember him all the time.
Well, I mean, the argument could be made that he's really bending over backwards to do that already. I mean, and that point comes out quite clearly in the Bhagavatam, that he manifests himself in unlimited avatars. Avatar really means one who goes out of his way. He's coming from a different realm altogether just to come down into our purview. He doesn't have to, but he descends specifically to give an idea to us of like, here I am. But you're talking about psychology now, the soul, and this is something that Plato talked about. Plato talked about how the cave dwellers were, they're locked in the cave. This an analogy he gives of the material world and why we're reluctant, and that it's a psychological condition that I develop. So here's how he describes it. There are those who are living in caves and that's all they know. And they're facing the back of the cave, and there's a fire behind them that is putting some shadows and flickering light on the back of the cave. And they're chained in there. And they're used to it. So they accept that that's reality. And that's all the reality. I mean, that's everything. This is their world. And this is not unusual even in the modern world. You don't need a mythological story to describe this, but even prisoners who become what's called institutionalized get so used to being in a cell and getting fed, canned vegetables and whatever else they get, and being on somebody else's schedule, that when they get out, they don't like it. And they commit a crime just so they can go back in. And if they can't do that, oftentimes they commit suicide because it's very, very difficult to get out of that conditioning of being institutionalized in that way. It's a common phenomena. Now, Plato goes on to say that one of the cave dwellers gets out. And he somehow or other gets out of the cave and goes out into the bright outer world and sees, oh, look at this. There's a sun. And there's people, and there's varieties of colors and trees, and all shapes and forms I've never seen before. It's an overload of experience of the senses and so forth, and he's overjoyed, of course, to see that that wasn't reality in the cave. This is the reality. This is just a reflection inside. So then he rushes back in the cave to tell everybody and liberate them and say, you got to come with me, and they want to kill him. And they say, you're insane. You're absolutely insane. There's no other world except for this. And so Plato goes on to explain how one would, in that situation, as a person who's been liberated from the cave, would have to be very careful to introduce the conception of the outer world very gradually. Like bring in one ray of light and show it on the wall and say, see, that's what the sun looks like. And that's what the Upanishads do. The Upanishads, they give a little idea, give me a verse from the Ishish Upanishad that talks about what is the soul in this world. Sohamasmi. What's that verse? Sohamasmi. That's the last line. Before two or three before that. Before that. Pushane karshe yama surya prajapatya vayu Vyuharasmin samuhatejo yatte rupam kalyanatamam tatte pashami osava so purusha soamasmi. So this is verses saying that, it's saying like the soul's just like unto the sun, as am I. It's giving some comparison, like the Upanishads are saying, if you want to see what God looks like, then look at yourself. Because you are the thing that most resembles God in this world, because you're a part of Him. Whereas the rest of the material manifestations are nothing like God. They're dead, they're jada, they're lifeless. But you're bringing light to the body as an example. So you're just like God. And a lot of people take the Upanishads and they go, hey, I'm God. But this is a gradual introduction because, anyway, back to your point, the psychological condition is that I don't want to know the truth. And I don't want to be given the truth by somebody from the outside, because who are you? This is a kind of envy that people have. That who are you to tell me there's a spiritual world, And they become angry. That's Krishna says, vitaragabhaya krodha. They become angry when they hear different descriptions of the spiritual world because they're overcome by iccha dvesha. So some purification has to take place, in many cases gradually, till somebody can come to terms with this idea. And the other psychological crippling condition is that God's doing this to me. So I had this paradigm the other day that I came upon for my own use. And then I offered it when I was speaking at the ILS, and I said, hey, I like that because, for my own purification. And I actually used it. And then it worked for me. Should I tell you? Yes. I know it's kind of a secret. Yes. All right. So there are two aspects and ways that I can react to a given situation. One is to say why me? You ever say why me? Go, let's try this. Why me? This is an exercise. Why me? Why me? And the other one, which is the total antidote to that just takes you off that track onto a very progressive track. You ready? Yes. What's the lesson? What is the lesson behind this? Anything that throws you off or comes at you as misery, you can say, why me? And why is God doing this to me? This is a product of ignorance, of not knowing what's happening in the world and what the purpose of the world is. You don't have the bigger vision. And that Krishna is trying to give us in the Bhagavad Gita. And so you say, why me? And then I'm suffering, and God's making me suffer, and I don't deserve to suffer. There's a whole lot of other mantras that come out of my brain. But you can derail that immediately by just say this. It's very practical. What's the lesson? So you want me to tell you how I used it and how it worked? So I got to the airport in Calcutta. I knew I had too much stuff, but I usually don't care because, I have a frequent flyer thing that's, way up there. And I usually just show the card anywhere in India and they go, okay, go ahead. But for some reason, the people behind the desk, it was early in the morning, were not in a mood to accommodate me in any way, shape, or form. They wanted to weigh my cabin baggage, which to me is like, it's insane, especially if you have a platinum frequent flyer mile thing, and you just go like, you don't have to weigh my bag. I'm just getting on the flight and I'm flying to America. But they wanted to weigh everything, and then they said, is overweight. I showed them, it's Bhagavan's in there. I had all my puja paraphernalia. That's why it weighed so much, and they didn't care. They didn't care about anything except for they wanted me to suffer and pay, I thought. And I was starting to think, why me? And then I remembered my lecture, and I said, what's the lesson? So I became equipoised. I went and shifted all my luggage. They let me check in 4 bags rather than carry on, a handbag that was a little overweight. And, of course, they charged me an extra 3,000 rupees, which made them feel real happy. And I could have kept saying, why me? But then I kept saying, what's the lesson? And I thought, I should travel lighter. And then when I came home, I was thinking, I should travel lighter and, through the world and everything else. I started getting rid of stuff left and right. get winnowing out this and that, and I became very productive all of a sudden, uncharacteristically, and it moved me in a completely different direction. Just asking the right question or having the right mantra on hand. And so we suffer from a psychological defect here in this world, and that is, why me? It's a mistake. It's a psychological mistake. And that's mentioned in the Bhagavatam, Bhayam dvitiya binibesha tasyad, ishad apetasya viparyoyo smriti. It's saying, listen, little jiva, you just got turned around, little fella, just turn around the other direction, and you're going to be okay. Don't make a big deal out of this. It doesn't have to be more painful than it already is. Don't add insult to injury. Turn your little head around and face the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and you'll find out He's your friend the whole time, and He's trying to help you out of here. And He goes out of His way to do it. And even if you can get a tiny vision of that from your own practice, then this river of gratitude starts to flow through your heart that God's actually trying to help me. He's always been trying to help me. And for some completely irrational reason, I've been resisting Him life after life. And that's a major breakthrough when someone has that in mind, that comes to, as it always does, Tate Anukam Sasimik Shamanu. Yes, Prabhu.
Actually, what you just said about the living entity kind of programmed to turn away its face from Krishna. There is in Dashmul Shiksha Sotram by Bhaktivinoda Thakur, there is a verse on this one. Swarupartha hinan nija sukha paran Krishna vimukhan hare maya dandayan. So basically it says that the Jeev is nija sukha paran. It's actually averse from its actual self-interest.
Averse from its self-interest.
It's self-interest. And Bhagavatam also says, Nate viduhu swarthagatim hi Vishnum, right? So, nija sukha paran, Krishna vimukhan. It's actually turned its face away from Krishna. And Hare Maya Dandayan. So, the Lord Hari's Maya actually punishes that Jeev. The Guna Nigada Jala Kalayati. It actually creates a strong web of gunas. Then Tathal Sthulaihi Lingaihi. Dvividha varnaihi, it actually creates two kind of bodies, the subtle body and the gross body. And then it actually creates this mahakarma alanaihi. It creates a strong, chain of action-reaction. Nayati patitam swarga narayo. So it actually takes you sometimes in heaven, sometimes in hell. So through this is how this verse mentions very beautifully how the Jeev is getting entrapped in material nature.
Yeah, very helpful to know the stages. This is part of Sambandha Gyan, is to study this and say, like, how did I get into this? What are the ways in which I became entangled and so forth? But when we're talking about the irrational way in which the Jiva gets involved with material nature and goes against his own nature, have you ever seen a little bird banging into a window? And you're going like, what are you doing? Bang, 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 over and over again. And this is kind of the vision of the Jiva in the material world, thinking friends, enemies, but or maybe there's a lover there, but it's reflection, smashing his head into something hard, and that's what we get in the material world when we're after the non-permanent again and again, thinking that there's something in it for me, but I'm not actually seeing it. And now we'll ask Satyadev Prabhu to give a wrap-up.
Well, I'm in a mind spin. A lot of things flying around. But I like your example of asking the right question. I think when we're suffering, we always say, why me? That's the normal thing. But who asks the question, what's the lesson? And as you were having this talk, I was thinking about, once we do come to the material world and we come under the influences of the material energy, we're dreaming that we're something that we're not, right? We're in a dream. Even when our eyes are open and we're talking, we're seeing the world, we're talking to each other through the dream of our false ego. And so we're in this dream state, and the Vedas are telling us, Krishna is telling us, please wake up from this dream. And so how is he helping us wake up from the dream? By making the dream really miserable. Who wants to wake up from a happy dream? Right? And even when this kind of goes to the question of free will, that Risheshwari Leela was pointing to, when you're dreaming, how much free will do you have? Can you control the dream? No. But we all reach a point, especially if we're having a nightmare, where we reach a development in consciousness where we're ready to awaken. So otherwise we wouldn't be in this room. So when the jiva comes to that point of being ready to awaken, then the Lord makes arrangement for that. But still, we always have to choose to wake up. And so that's that critical point. But, and from our point of view, we're thinking, wow, why does it take so many lifetimes? But it does take, time is relative. But each jiva has to come to that point of billing, like you said, to change directions. Instead of wanting to stay in the dream, be willing to really let that dream go and awaken. And that's a scary, challenging thing, when we're conditioned, because the body has this fear mechanism for self-preservation, right? If we see any kind of danger, then we feel fear, and that overrides our logic and everything else, and we respond to that signal. But our false ego also has that same fear mechanism, and it uses it to keep us from awakening. So every time we reach this point of being willing to let go of this person we think we are and accept ourselves as a servant of Krishna, that fear arises, bhayam dvitiya. That fear is always there in the background, and that's what's always keeping us from awakening or wanting us to choose to stay asleep. Right? When the alarm goes off, we hit it, and I would like to sleep a little bit longer. So that's my wrap up.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Any last points? Yes.
I just had a question. Probably I've heard the answer, but I just keep on missing it. So, if everything is done by the three modes of nature and I'm not the doer, then why are we punished for the sins?
Well, it's a natural way in which the machinery of the material world works. That it's like if you bang your head into the window as a little bird, you may say, why am I being punished? But the way Krishna puts it in the Bhagavad Gita is, why are you punishing yourself? You're a living entity. You're capable of full cognizance and of acting in a normal way. But a deeper way to answer that is the way Satyadev Prabhu was saying it in a dream. If the dream is very pleasant, you'll just stay sleeping. If there's something that jars you in the dream, it'll wake you up. So one could then say that the material world is organized in such a way that you get a kind of reaction to things that you do that are unnatural, that is quite informing, like sensitivity training means that you learn how something feels when you do it to others. In sensitivity training, they take you through, I've never had it before, obviously, but there's a way in which if you have anger problems, you're angry with somebody else, or you mistreat somebody else, how does it feel when you're mistreated? So the material nature is organized in a compassionate way to refine us, so that when we do things that are off-center, that are not aligned with our higher purpose, then we get this reaction that, like guardrails, that put us back into, onto the track that we're supposed to go on. So unless that's there, ultimately, then how do we come to the point of learning and appreciating what is proper behavior and so forth? And of course, that point comes up in the sixth canto of the Bhagavatam, that even if you're given good moral instructions and you understand what's right and wrong, you take a lot of self-help courses and stuff like that. Still, it doesn't mean that you won't do wrong, because there's a kind of lingering contamination that stays in the heart that pushes us in the wrong direction. And through the process of bhakti, that gradually becomes purified, so that even the impetus to do the wrong thing, even when we know it's wrong, because that's possible also, becomes diminished. And as Prabhupada puts it in the Gita, then one's long-cherished desire to lord it over the material nature gradually goes away, because you find something better. You find your relationship with Krishna, which is fascinating, fulfilling, and which gives you this impetus, to do the right thing. And the impetus to do the wrong thing diminishes to nil, ultimately. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai, Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai, Gaur Bhaktivinoda ki jai, Gaur Premanande, Vancha Kalpatarvishcha, Kripa Sindhaveva cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. We thank His Grace Satyadev Prabhu for coming down to the ISV tonight, and all of you for making the trip through the dark to make it here, risking life and limb, and everyone who joined us online from various places, gave your valuable attention for these last couple hours. Now we're going to put away all the asanas, and then we're going to open up the dance floor, and we're going to have the artik for Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, because there's nobody better than Lord Chaitanya. Hare Krishna.
Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, hey, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman, Nachari Armarman.